Let's turn to 2 Chronicles chapter 27. Jotham is another king whom we would classify as a good king. Judah has had 3 good kings in a row. That is unusual. What were their names? Joash, Amaziah, Uzziah, and now we have Jotham. Verse 1 and 2 of 2 Chronicles chapter 27. Jotham was 25 years old when he became king, and he reigned in Jerusalem 16 years. His mother's name was Jerusha, daughter of Zadok. He did what was right in the eyes of the Lord, just as his father Uzziah had done. But unlike him, he did not enter the temple of the Lord. The people, however, continued their corrupt practices. Something very strange and interesting is said about this man. He didn't enter the temple of the Lord. Why, I guess there is a background for this. Remember when his father Uzziah, he went into the temple, what happened? He became a leper. But of course, he went the wrong way. He intruded into the holy place, and he became a leper. I guess Jotham grew up not being able to play on his father's lap, not being able to see him as often as he wished because he had leprosy. Think a lot of credit would go to Jerusha, daughter of Zadok, who brought up Jotham. You can't help but feel sympathetic toward him. But he set a very bad example for the nation. As a result, the people acted corruptly. They did not turn to God. Here is a man with a tremendous opportunity to lead his people back to God. But he had this hang-up about the past. Perhaps a root of bitterness. His father was made a leper in the temple, and he just didn't want to get into that temple. The past paralyzed Jotham. Now think back. In your own life, you may have instances that have been of great discouragement to you. And because of that, you stop yourself from doing something that was probably right. Yes, the past has paralyzed you. In the life of Jotham, the past experience of his father paralyzed him from not moving in the temple of the Lord. And this set a bad example to the people. But Jotham, however, did do other great things. Verse 3, Jotham rebuilt the upper gate of the temple of the Lord and did extensive work on the wall at the hill of Ophel. Verse 4, he built towns in the Judean hills and forts and towers in the wooded areas. In that day the land was wooded. Today the hills are bare. For the most part, however, trees are being planted now so that more of the land is becoming wooded again. Back in those days, it was a land flowing with milk and honey. Jotham built castles among the trees and the hills. He was indeed a great builder. I guess he is the man who started building subdivisions. Verses 5 and 6. Jotham made war on the king of the Ammonites and conquered them. That year, the Ammonites paid him 100 talents of silver, 10,000 cors of wheat, and 10,000 cors of barley. The Ammonites brought him the same amounts also in the 2nd and 3rd years. Jotham grew powerful because he walked steadfastly before the Lord his God. He kept his nation strong militarily as his father had done, a good architect as well as a good soldier, a good commander. Verses 8 and 9. He was 25 years old when he became king, and he reigned in Jerusalem 16 years. Jotham rested with his fathers and was buried in the city of David, and Ahaz his son succeeded him as king. Only one brief chapter is devoted to the reign of Jotham. Here is a young man who could have been a great king, but a prejudice, a past experience, prevented him and paralyzed him from being the great king that he could be. Dear friend, if there's one lesson from Jotham, don't let the past paralyze you. Move ahead, have faith in God, and you will experience victory. Now let's move on to Ahaz. We knew that sooner or later, Judah would get a bad king, and here he is. At this time, the northern kingdom of Israel was on the verge of going into captivity, and the southern kingdom of Judah was brought very low by the sins of Ahaz, as we shall see. Verses 1 and 2 of 2 Chronicles chapter 28. Ahaz was 20 years old when he became king, and he reigned in Jerusalem 16 years. Unlike his father David, he did not do what was right in the eyes of the Lord. He walked in the ways of the kings of Israel and also made cast images for worshipping the Baals. Ahaz went completely into the worship of images. Ahaz was a bad king. He walked in the ways of the kings of Israel, and that meant evil ways. David was the human standard by which these kings were measured, and this man fell far short of that human standard. As a result, we now begin to see the sad future of the southern kingdom. The northern kingdom will go into captivity to the Assyrians. God will give many warnings to the southern kingdom, but they likewise will follow into captivity, not to Assyria, but later on to Babylon. Verse 3. He burnt sacrifices in the valley of Ben Hinnom and sacrificed his sons in the fire, following the detestable ways of the nations the Lord had driven out before the Israelites. This means he offered his children on a red-hot altar. Actually, it was an image that was heated red-hot for human sacrifices. Verse 4. He offered sacrifices and burned incense at the high places, on the hilltops, under every spreading tree. Ahaz went completely into the worship of images and plunged the southern kingdom into sin. Now let's read verse 5. Therefore the Lord his God handed him over to the king of Aram. The Arameans defeated him and took many of his people as prisoners and brought them to Damascus. As it were, God opens up the doors of his nation, his people, and permits the enemy to come in. Syria comes down, and for the first time the wall is breached into the southern kingdom. There are many who are taken captive. The sad part is that the northern kingdom had joined with Syria in making this attack. And so we find that many who were taken captive actually became captives of Israel in the northern kingdom. Israel took men of Judah into captivity. Verse 6. In one day, Pekah, son of Remaliah, killed 120,000 soldiers in Judah, because Judah had forsaken the Lord, the God of their fathers. This is a very sad plight of the southern kingdom. God permitted this to happen because Ahaz and the people had plunged the nation into all forms of evil. Now you may ask, why does a loving God punish a people, a whole group of people, because of their sins? Can he not forgive? But then you must look on the flip side. Think of the many children who died because of sin. Ahaz didn't blink an eyelid when he put his sons on that altar and burnt them. Doesn't a God of justice have a reason to punish them for the evil that they were doing right in their own land? God was using the people of Syria to punish Judah for all the sins they commit. I don't think we can ask that question to God. When there is trouble that comes upon us, when there is hardship that comes upon us, God allows certain situations and certain things to come into our lives so that he can straighten us out, so that he can discipline us. God is a holy God. He is a God of justice, and he does things that are right. We should never question God. He can see beyond what we can see. God knows all, and he can see everything. Now God sends a prophet to Israel to speak to them because of their extreme cruelty to their brethren. Verses 9 to 10. But a prophet of the Lord named Oded was there, and he went out to meet the army when it returned to Samaria. He said to them, because the Lord, the God of your fathers, was angry with Judah, he gave them into your hand. but you have slaughtered them in a rage that reaches to heaven. And now you intend to make the men and women of Judah and Jerusalem your slaves? But aren't you also guilty of sins against the Lord your God? Verse 11. Now listen to me, send back your fellow countrymen you have taken as prisoners, for the Lord's fierce anger rests on you. God had expressly forbidden taking their brethren into slavery in Leviticus chapter 25, verses 39 to 40. You can read that later. A group of leaders in the northern kingdom took their stand against enslaving their brethren from the southern kingdom. Let's read from verses 12 onwards. Then some of the leaders in Ephraim, Azariah son of Jehohanan, Berechiah son of Meshillemoth, Jehikiz, Amasa, confronted those who were arriving from the war. You must not bring these prisoners here, they said, or we will be guilty before the Lord. Do you intend to add to our sin and guilt? For our guilt is already great, and his fierce anger rests on Israel. Now listen to what the soldiers do. Verse 14 to 15. So the soldiers gave up the prisoners and plunder in the presence of the officials and all the assembly. The men designated by name took the prisoners, and from the plunder they clothed all who were naked. They provided them with clothes and sandals, food and drink, and healing balm. All those who were weak they put on donkeys. So they took them back to their fellow countrymen at Jericho, the city of palms, and returned to Samaria. They were able to secure their release and return them to their homes. The people of Judah got back to their homes. That's again simply because of God's grace. God confronted Israel for the wickedness that they had done to their own brethren, and they allowed the people of Judah to get back. The southern kingdom of Judah was in a really sad plight at this time. If it had not been for the fact that God intervened, they would have been almost eliminated as a nation. It did weaken them a great deal and laid them open to further invasion. Verses 16 to 18. At that time, King Ahaz sent to the king of Assyria for help. The Edomites had again come and attacked Judah and carried away prisoners, while the Philistines had raided towns in the foothills and in the Negev of Judah. They captured and occupied Bethshemesh, Ajalon, and Gederoth, as well as Socoh, Timnah, and Gimzo with their surrounding villages. When God removed his protection, it was like opening the floodgates and letting the enemy come in. This was, of course, the result of the nation's sin. Wars are the direct result of sin. In the New Testament, James asks the question in James chapter 4, verses 1 and 2. What causes fights and quarrels among you? Don't they come from your desires that battle within you? You want something but don't get it. You kill and covet, but you cannot have what you want. You quarrel and fight. You do not have because you do not ask God. As long as there is sin in the heart of man, he cannot have peace. He can't have any kind of peace. Peace with God, peace in his own heart, or peace with his fellow man. There must be a settling of the sin question in order to have peace. Yes, we do need to have peace with God. That would give us peace in our own hearts, and ultimately peace with our fellow men. There must be a settling of the sin question in order to have peace. The experience of Judah illustrates this. Because of sin on the part of the people, they do not experience peace. Ahaz makes another big mistake. Instead of turning to God, he gets to turn to Assyria for help. Verses 20 to 21. Tiglath-Pileser, king of Assyria, came to him, but he gave him trouble instead of help. Ahaz took some of the things from the temple of the Lord, and from the royal palace, and from the princes, and presented them to the king of Assyria. But that did not help him. Ahaz puts his trust in the king of Assyria. He sends him generous gifts from the wealth of the temple and of the palace. The king of Assyria accepted it, but he never did send any help to Ahaz. He didn't need to. He was a powerful king, and poor Ahaz was a very weak king. Ahaz had turned from God and trusted in Assyria, and Assyria let him down. Assyria was a disappointment to the king Ahaz. As long as men are sinners, men will be liars, which means you cannot trust them. The Bible tells us we are not to put our trust in man. We are to put our trust and confidence in God. Verses 22 to 23. In his time of trouble, King Ahaz became even more unfaithful to the Lord. He offered sacrifices to the gods of Damascus who had defeated him, for he thought, "Since the gods of the kings of Aram have helped them, I will sacrifice to them, so they will help me." But they were his downfall, and the downfall of all Israel. Ahaz then cut up the vessels of the house of God. He shut up the doors of the temple, and he built altars that were not in God's favor in every corner of Jerusalem. Listen to 27. Ahaz rested with his fathers and was buried in the city of Jerusalem, but he was not placed in the tombs of the kings of Israel. And Hezekiah his son succeeded him as king. So ends this very sad and sordid and sorry reign of Ahaz. Now, if we just look back and think of Jotham and Ahaz, there are plenty of lessons that we can learn. Jotham was paralyzed because of his past. He would not enter into the temple of God because of what took place in his father's life. When Uzziah went into the temple, because of pride, he got leprosy. And what happens? Jotham never darkened the walls of the temple. He stayed clear of that place. And that became a bad example to the people. Now here on the other hand, you have Ahaz. What does he do? When he is faced with problems and pressure, instead of turning to his God, he looks at people. And that led to his downfall. Yes, it could be the past that can paralyze you. It could be people who could just get you away from God. Then in verse 22, it was during times of pressure, present circumstances and pressure. And what happened during that time? It says he became even more unfaithful to the Lord. He started looking at false gods, and that led to his downfall. My dear friend, whether it's the past, whether it's people, whether it's the present pressure, don't ever turn from the Lord. In those times of darkness, in those times of pressure, in those times of disappointment, look up to God and you will find help. Let's read James chapter 1, verses 2 to 4. Consider it pure joy, my brothers, whenever you face trials of many kinds, because you know that the testing of your faith develops perseverance. Perseverance must finish its work so that you may be mature and complete, not lacking anything. My dear friends, whether it's the past, whether it's people, whether it's present pressure, remember these are opportunities for you to trust God, to look up to Him and experience His victory so that His work might finish its task in your life, so that you can be mature and complete, not lacking anything, and you will be able to have a good influence on all those around you. Yes, if you are an influencer, yes, you will have a lot of problems. The past can get you. Present pressure, all kinds of circumstances, people can disappoint you. But dear friend, consider it pure joy, my brothers, Whenever you face trials of many kinds, remember these are opportunities for you to develop perseverance and faith. Look up to God. Trust Him at all times. My dear friend, God loves you and He cares for you and He wants the best in your life. Sorrow looks behind, worry looks around, but faith looks up. Dear friend, look up.